Hello, and welcome to our group video project, The Eight Principal Nations of World War II. In this presentation, we will outline the conditions of the eight major belligerent nations in the years leading up to the war, including their military and economic preparedness, international alliances, and specific events that led them to direct involvement in World War II. So, let's start with Germany. In January of 1933, Hitler became Chancellor of Germany. 2 months later, the Enabling Act would make him dictator. Hitler immediately called for an expansionist policy, declaring the national lead for Lebensraum, the living space he viewed as necessary for the growth of the new German Empire. Hitler also endeavored to, in his view, purify the German people. This began with the persecution of the Jews and continued with the T4 program, the mass murder of citizens with mental and physical disabilities. This is a propaganda poster from 1936 stressing the burden that the disabled placed on German society. Hitler's massive investments in the military put the German economy in danger. The need for resources necessitated a series of wars to capture territory that contained both the materials and the manpower needed for greater production. In 1938, Germany occupied parts of, then all of, Czechoslovakia. A year later, the Wehrmacht tore through Poland, and the world would soon be at war again. At the end of the First World War, France and Great Britain dictated the harsh terms of the Treaty of Versailles. As a result, France was able to gain a significant amount of territory around the world, including the Alsace-Lorraine region to their east and colonies in Africa, the Middle East, and the France made sure to maintain significant ground forces and modernized weaponry, leery of yet another German invasion. France was also aware that it needed strong alliances. They nurtured their relationship with Great Britain as their closest and most trusted and most powerful ally in Europe. When Hitler invaded Poland in 1939, the British and French declared war on Germany. Just 8 months later, in May of 1940, France's greatest fears came to fruition. Hitler's Wehrmacht tore through Belgium and across the French border. France would surrender after only 6 weeks of fighting. Prior to World War II, Italy was a homogeneous country sharply divided by regional differences. The north was heavily industrialized, while the south remained agricultural. Overall, Italy lacked the necessary raw materials needed to modernize the entire country. As early as 1919, fascism was gaining support with the rise of Benito Mussolini as a vocal leader of the fascist movement. Appointed prime minister in 1922, Mussolini soon arranged for his rise to dictator. His primary goal of territorial expansion appealed to an Italian population seeking prosperity from greater access to natural resources. In 1935, Italy invaded Ethiopia with little resistance from other European countries. In May of 1939, Mussolini signed the Pact of Steel, forming an alliance between Italy and Germany. 1 year later, when Japan signed the Tripartite Act, the Axis powers would be complete. By the 1930s, China was engaged in a bloody civil war. The Chinese nationalist government, headed by Chiang Kai-shek, was fighting off the communist uprising led by Mao Zedong. In many parts of China, power was held by local warlords who controlled areas by force. At the Washington Conference of 1921-1922, economic and territorial protections for China were put in place. However, Japan had a desperate need for natural resources to feed its war machine, and this would lead to the occupation of Manchuria in 1931. Over the next 6 years, Japan would gradually expand its territorial occupation. In 1937, Japan invaded mainland China. At the outset of hostilities, the nationalist Chinese army was inefficient and technologically backwards. Already battling communist forces from within, China was now in danger of being completely defeated by imperialistic Japan. Japan was an island nation which severely lacked resources. Functioning as a constitutional monarchy, the nominal leader of the Empire of Japan was Emperor Hirohito. As the position of prime minister eroded in strength throughout the 1930s and Japan took on the makings of a military dictatorship, Supreme Military Leader Hideki Tojo emerged as the true leader of Japan. In 1931, in order to gain access to resources, the decision to invade and occupy Manchuria was made independently by leaders of the Japanese Kwantung Army. The decision was accepted without protest by the Japanese government. Gradually, Japanese forces expanded the occupation. In 1937, Japan launched a full invasion of mainland China. The ensuing war would be marked by numerous atrocities by the Japanese military. In 1940, Japan joined the existing alliance between Nazi Germany and Fascist Italy by signing the Tripartite Pact. The Axis powers were now complete. Despite the effects of the Great Depression in the early 1930s, the economy of Britain, buoyed by its colonial holdings around the world, was enjoying a steady recovery in the latter half of the decade. With an eye on the growing power of Hitler and Nazi Germany, the British wisely attended to building up their military. Hoping to avoid a ground war, they invested heavily in their Navy and the Royal Air Force. Hitler annexed the Sudetenland in western Czechoslovakia in October 1938. In an effort to avoid war, Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain, joined by Prime Minister Daladier of France, hoped to appease Hitler by allowing the occupation. 5 months later, Hitler took the rest of Czechoslovakia. 6 months after that, the Nazis would invade Poland, causing the French and British to declare war on Germany. The United Kingdom found itself squarely in a war they had tried desperately to avoid. The Communist Soviet Union was led by Joseph Stalin. With ample access to natural resources, a stable economy, and a solid plan for modernization, Stalin implemented the first of a series of 5-year plans for modernization in 1927. Perhaps as a direct response to growing unrest in Europe and the Far East, the third 5-year plan, starting in 1938, focused on the modernization and production of arms and armaments. In August 1939, the Soviets signed the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact of non-aggression with Nazi Germany. In May of 1941, Nazi Germany commenced a massive buildup of troops in the east. Stalin, having too much faith in the non-aggression pact, assessed that Germany would not launch an attack on the Soviet Union. On the morning of June 22, 1941, he would be proven tragically incorrect. Hitler ordered the launch of Operation Barbarossa with the goal of annihilating the Soviet Union. In the early 1930s, the United States was crippled by the Great Depression. However, their economy was rebounding by the end of the decade. Closely allied with France and Britain, the United States was self-sufficient in resources and technologically advanced. Despite the military being curtailed following the First World War, access to resources, technology, and manpower would expedite the coming transition to wartime production. In response to Japanese aggression in China and Southeast Asia, President Roosevelt had cut off trade of oil and other resources to Japan by July of 1941. Caught in a quagmire in China and with resources rapidly depleting, Japan launched a desperate assault against the United States. On the morning of December 7th, the Japanese Navy attacked the U.S. Pacific Fleet anchored at Pearl Harbor and U.S. bases in the Philippines. The United States declared war on Japan the next day. 3 days after that, they declared war on both Italy and Germany, and war had enveloped the globe.